Welcome back to our event on waste to energy plants. We're now entering the final leg of today's debate, looking at the role of non-recyclable waste in the EU Taxonomy. Now, EU Taxonomy is quite the buzzword in the Brussels bubble. The Sustainable Finance Taxonomy is the European Commission's list of green investments, what it considers climate-friendly investments. But there are concerns from the industry that waste to energy is not mentioned in the delegated acts, which lay out what investments in the European Commission sees as sustainable. They also argue that the treatment of non-residual waste is only partially explored in these. So, to discuss the representation, I'm joined by Patrick Clerens once more, ESWET Secretary General, Valerie Plainemaison, the Secretary General of the European Waste Management Association, and Jonas Helseth, the Director of the NGO Bellona Europa. Now, we can start with a brief introduction from all of you. Patrick, what is your take on this subject?
Yes, thanks for asking this important question, actually. Actually, this goes down to the role of waste to energy in the society and therefore then in the taxonomy. And if you look at waste to energy, you see that even if, as we heard before, the aim is to reduce residual waste by half in the next 8 years, which is quite a feat and quite a challenge, knowing that the waste generation in Europe increased in the last 5 years in a row, where we have statistics, so from 15 to 19, it didn't stop to increase, so there will be quite a feat. But we should go forward, separate, reduce the waste, and go in this direction. There's no other choice. But then to say that the waste vanishes makes for me no sense. Some parts of this waste to energy or the waste treatment, like hazardous co-incineration in cement kilns or other ways, are treated in the taxonomy. But the most important one, which has a real chance of reducing emissions, and we heard this, methane emissions from landfill and so on, it was clearly stated, is not treated in there. So for me, there's something missing, and knowing that the technical expert group asked the Sustainable Platform to look into the waste to energy topic, I feel it should be taken up and that the criteria should be developed.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll dive much deeper into that in a moment. But Valerie, for the moment, what is your take on the topic?
If I may add something to what Patrick says, the more recycling we are going to do, and this is what we wish to do, the more quality recycling we need to do, and that is what we wish to do, the more residues you have as well. So the difference is the residues. So as Patrick says, whatever we wish, we will not avoid residues. And the taxonomy needs to tackle the fate of the residues in order to have them treated in a best way. Having said that, the taxonomy cannot ignore as well the hierarchy, simply said, and cannot ignore that to have a circular economy, you need to have complement which are indispensable to the other higher treatment steps. Not only complementary, but indispensable. If you don't have outlets of recycling facilities or recovery facilities for treating the residues, then those facilities are in trouble, are in difficulty. So it's urgently needed that residual waste treatment is not ignored in the taxonomy.
So a missing link in a way.
A missing link, yes. And for this treatment, waste to energy is the key, has the key role.
And Jonas, finally coming to you for your view on this. What do you think of this topic?
So maybe, thank you, and maybe for a quick background first, for those who don't know Bellona, an international environmental NGO founded in Oslo, Norway. And I think it's helpful with a bit of background on that because we've heard a lot about Oslo today in the conversation and what's happening there. We actually were at the start of that journey that Oslo's been making. And I think it's important to understand why that is. We don't really work on waste so much as we work on climate. Waste is part of what we do. And Oslo was, of course, one of the cities that said early on they want to be a climate leader. They want to go net zero. And we worked a lot with Oslo to come to a conclusion about how they can actually do that and what are the main sources of emissions. And one of those, of course, major sources for most cities will be waste incineration. And what Oslo wanted to do, and I think that's also important here, is changing the timeline. Everyone in Europe is now talking about net zero in 2050, but Oslo wanted to go for net zero in 2030. And we see a lot of cities, and I think that's all over the world, taking leadership in the climate debate and saying, where governments are not willing to go because of various constraints, cities can take lead. We see that in America. We see that, I think, in most big cities around the world. They want to step up and fill that gap that governments are leaving. So we saw in Oslo found that waste incineration is a major source of emissions. We work toward, also a world where we recycle everything, and I think that still has to be what we're striving toward. And it should always be starting with reuse, recycling, before we get to anything else. But what we focus on is the climate emergency. And in that situation, we don't have 30 years, we don't have 20 years to deal with emissions. We need to do something about them in this decade. And that's why Oslo has that CCS project. We started working with that with the city of Oslo before Fortum as a company bought the waste incinerator. We're happy to see Fortum bringing that onward, but we need to see other cities stepping up. We see that in other cities in Europe, but also elsewhere. We were just contacted by New York City representatives who want to look into something similar for their waste incinerators, and in the Netherlands we see a lot of development. So for us this is about the climate emergency and about the fact that even if you believe that we don't have residual waste in 2050, we're going to have it in the next decade, and that is the timeline we have to act.
Thank you. And my first question follows on from what you've been saying. Patrick, maybe let's start with you. What will be the need for residual waste treatment in the coming years? Will it increase? Will it decrease? And is there an investment gap that needs to be filled when it comes to things like supporting these waste-to-energy plants and maybe the taxonomy?
Maybe it's a bit too technical, but actually all the statistics we're looking at in Europe is municipal solid waste. But municipal solid waste is only 10% of the total waste which we generate in the EU. So we're talking about 10% of all the waste we produce. Okay, some of this waste is construction waste, some is mining waste, but still it leaves a significant portion which is CNI, so commercial industrial waste, out of this whole picture. Also this cutting in 50% in 8 years leaves all the rest out of the pictures, only municipal solid waste. So we need to treat this waste, and we need to continue with separate collection, recycling as much as possible, but then we need to get the residual waste streams which we cannot recycle treated in a sustainable way, where we heard the whole day how this can be done and how it can go carbon negative. So by not including waste to energy taxonomy, you will either manage to push the waste out of Europe, because the facilities will not be there to treat this waste. And Ella mentioned before that we don't have all the capacities we need today to treat the residual waste. I'm talking about the residual waste, if you see what's coming up. And on the other side, we see that the member states which landfill, and some member states landfill still 80% of the waste, 80%. They for sure need to go to recycling and separate collection, but they have a huge need for waste to energy capacities in this integrated waste treatment. And that's what we're looking at. So you punish these countries and you don't address the topic by putting them under the carpet. It's not helping.
So in a way, the taxonomy is always almost ahead of itself in getting rid of this, because it is leaving this gap when it comes to what many countries need to use to get rid of landfill.
I've got a question. So you followed the news recently. We saw that we have a huge increase in gas prices, in electricity prices, going through the roof. And a lot of people blame, when you read the news, this to the fact that we don't have enough generation capacity, not enough dispatchable generation capacity. And this is one of the reasons why you have this price increasing. And now a lot of people ask, oh, did we not put the order on the wrong way? Shouldn't we not first put the renewable generation, the storage, the grids, and build this all up, and then only stop the dispatchable backup power, which is mostly based on fossil fuels? And on the waste treatment, you can ask yourself the same. Should we prohibit proven residual waste treatment today, cut it off, and then see what happens? Or should we not more put in place the other treatment, an MRBT? We heard it before, but we did not really see this happening. I don't know where's one MRBT plant. In both publications from the NGOs, I read a lot about we will do this, we project this will happen. But I didn't see it happening today. While the residual waste is there today, The residual waste is landfill today, and we need absolutely to treat it in a sustainable way and not putting it under the carpet for the next generation to dig it out of a hole because it will pollute the groundwater or because the resources will be needed. So we need to act now, and waste to energy is needed for this in an integrated way, I repeat it, and therefore not addressing it for me is lacking seriousness of the policymakers.
Thank you. And Jonas, I know you wanted to come in on this. Is there a gap in the taxonomy?
So before I get to that, I think it's important to say that I still haven't seen a study that substantiates the, if you look at a 10-year timeline, a 20-year timeline, the need for additional waste incinerator capacity. So it'd be good to see those numbers if you have them. Now to the taxonomy, and that's back to your question, I think earlier, that is the taxonomy getting rid of waste incinerators? I think that's the wrong framing, and I think it's really important to get that right, because it reminds me very much of the debate about should gas be in the taxonomy, because it's a transition fuel. First of all, back to what I said, if we don't make the right decisions now, we're locked in with the wrong stuff 30 years from now. So I think there is no such transition space, but that's a different debate. The point is that a lot of people talk about whether gas is in taxonomy or not as something that implies that gas investments will be banned if they are not in the taxonomy. And the taxonomy is not about banning stuff. It is about creating a gold standard for what is to be seen as a sustainable investment. And that has to be the basis of anything that is included in the taxonomy. Not being in the taxonomy does not mean that it's illegal in the European Union to make an investment in something. So I think that's really important to get across, because we've seen what Vice President Dombrovskis said. He had a written response to a parliamentary question this summer about whether waste incinerators should be in the taxonomy. And the reference, of course, was to the do no significant harms principle, and a document that the Commission put out as a guideline document for the recovery funds for the member states this summer. And not surprisingly, there was a clear reference there to, in the context of new waste incinerator capacity, that this would be damaging the targets for reuse and recycling in the European Union. So, I think back to the point about numbers, we need to see a substantiation of why there is an apparent need for building new capacity. I haven't seen that. But I think it's very fair to say that if the targets for recycling and reuse mean anything, then there is a strong case to be made for not putting new capacity in place. However, what from my perspective is missing in the taxonomy when it comes to waste incinerator is the same thing as perhaps for gas. There should not be under any circumstances, anything new built without CCS as a starting point, because we are in a climate emergency. If you build a gas plant, like Belgium is now planning, well, that's a decision to be made, but not if there is no plan for CCS. If you build a gas plant, which Germany is planning to do, to replace coal, with the current coalition agreement discussions, it should not be allowed without CCS, and I think the same is true for waste incinerators. You shouldn't be allowed to build one. But we could have a discussion about should an investment into CCS on the existing capacity be a sustainable investment. I think that's a different case entirely.
And just to reply to what you said, sorry for taking the floor, to reply to what you said, if you look at CWEP, what CWEP did, they made a so-called circular calculation tool. Go on the webpage, play with this tool, and you will see the need for residual waste treatment.
Remark. This would have my first remark, but the second remark is that non-being taxonomy eligible is not only a matter of accessing green finance. It will be a matter of being politely correct for any circumstances of the business life or of the waste management chain, and it will be also a very important key element in many regulations. So if you're not taxonomy eligible, you are not well perceived, you are not well treated, you are not positively treated in other regulations. I can give one example, which is the state aid rules. I can give another example, which is the resilience and recovery plans. So many regulatory tools will be taken based on the taxonomy, which is probably a bit of exaggerated, but it is going to be this way. This is another reason why we pay attention to it.
Certainly. And I mean, would you, Valerie, want to see waste to energy plants seen as a transition fuel or a transitionary technology, or would you like to see it fully included?
It is not a transition fuel. It is, I mean, waste to energy plant produce heat and electricity, but not because it's a transition fuel, because it's a waste treatment that is crucial for the circular economy to happen, and that is a crucial step in the waste management chain. We operate the whole waste management chain from collection to preparation for recycling and recovery, energy recovery, final disposal. Hazardous, non-hazardous, municipal, industrial and commercial waste. So in all those areas, there is a need to consider the integrated chain of waste management, and waste to energy belongs to that. And it's a positive one because it uses the energy resource, the energy that is embedded in the waste. If it's no more needed in 20, 15 years, then we'll see. There will not be a lock-in effect. Waste will not go again to incinerators if there is no need for this. They will go where they have to go. If there is zero waste, then we'll be happy. I'm not sure that it will happen. Residual waste have to be treated. This is the reason why.
Is there an argument that you could actually include waste to energy, as Jonas says, when it has carbon capture and storage, and then that would push more funding towards a more greener waste to energy plant?
We would see three conditions for taxonomy eligibility for waste to energy, as far as FEAD is concerned, the Private Waste Management Association. But I don't think that other members of other associations would disagree with that. First, the plants, the facilities to be financed through green finance and taxonomy eligible should be in countries where there is a waste management plan. This is by law, but it is not properly enforced. And we think it is a very good tool to avoid overcapacities or to put capacities where they are needed. Mid-long-term strategy by the public authorities with the help then of private investment if needed. The second criterion for eligibility would be ensure that there is a selective collection scheme, separate collection waste or sorting out. Make sure that it is residual waste. And we are ready to engage ourselves in the fact that there will be a certificate. I mean, you show that this is existing. And the third criterion would be to check whether CCS, CCU is feasible. Because the answer is not always yes, but in case it is yes, it has to be implemented, it has to be put in place. That would be the three criteria.
And Patrick, do you see similar criteria? Is there anything you would add to that or disagree with?
Support this. I think it makes only sense to use waste to energy in an integrated waste management. That's clearly the case, and that's what we support from the beginning. And this is reflected in these three criteria, but it should obviously reply to the question of your fuel also. Will it be transitional fuel use or something? The answer is very easy. If you believe that you can recycle every product eternally, then you have no residual waste and you need no residual waste treatment. If you believe that you cannot recycle every product eternally, then you need to deal with the residual waste. That's as simple. Life is a matter of choices. For waste, it's exactly the same. It's all about choices, what you do with it. Because the pollutants are not going away if you make MRBT or MBT. It is in the waste, which you and me, we all produce. We throw the stuff away, and it is there. And what happens with the heavy metals? Either we put them into the ground, or we treat them, as I said before by Tom, they are separated, they will not go into the environment. So these are the questions you need to apply. It's all about choices. You cannot wish something and hope it will happen.
It's actually addressing the issue which we're already looking at with the waste we're producing. Jonas, would you support waste to energy plants being supported in the taxonomy if they had carbon capture and storage?
So again, I think it's not really us that Patrick and others would need to convince when it comes to the case for new capacity. I think that that is a case to be made, not least toward the Commission, where I just referred to the answer from Vice President Dombrovskis, and how that fits with the circular economy targets, the recycling, reuse targets. Now, I also don't really see how one can make the case that waste incinerators, new or old, have a place in the circular economy. However, as I said, the climate emergency is why I'm here, and that is what we need to address. So for me, under any circumstances, nothing new can be built that doesn't have a plan to be compliant with net zero. I think still I would like to see more engagement from the sector itself to deal with emissions, what we see in Oslo, but we need to see that elsewhere. And I mentioned some other places where we see that engagement. We need to see that across the sector. What is the plan to be compliant with net zero on the existing installations before we even start thinking about building something new? And of course, you can always make the case that, a waste incinerator is better than a landfill from a climate perspective. It's true, and for other perspectives too. But it is not something that should be branded as a green investment, because it's not. It is not a sustainable investment unless there is a climate plan, unless there's a plan to make sure that it doesn't undermine the targets that Vice President Dombrovskis referred to.
And Patrick, could I just get you to say maybe how many more waste-to-energy plants does Europe need? We've heard that some member states maybe have more landfill and that waste-to-energy might be useful for them. And so how many do these member states need, and would the funding, how much funding would be needed for that?
First, I would like to reply to what you said before about the circularity of waste-to-energy. In waste treatment and in a lot of industries, we don't see a fundamental change in 4 years. It is roughly the direction. And 4 years ago, the Commission made a communication on the role of waste to energy in the circular economy. 4 years ago. So it's not changing. So waste to energy has the role to play in the circular economy. The Commission acknowledged this. The Commission defined also the recycling methods, how you evaluate the recycling of metal from waste to energy plant and how they count towards your recycling targets. We have also tools for this to really quantify how much metal we do recycle in these plants, and we contribute to the circularity of the economy. So this is a point which I think has been discussed at least 4 years ago, has been clarified. So I see the role of waste energy in this. That's the first point. The second point, and I'm very sorry I can't reply to your question, I will not give you a number. I cannot give you a number because it's coming back to what we said before. The faster you can develop alternative treatment methods or do more recycling, the less you will need waste to energy. Waste to energy has one role: to treat residual waste and avoid that it's landfilled. That's the only role it has. And by doing so, it is recycling metals, energy, recovering energy, and so on and so on. So the number depends on your question on how much waste you want to ship around, how much residual waste exists after recycling, what hygienization needs are if another COVID wave will come. We will need to take care of all this masks and all the plastic stuff we have done, which nobody wants to recycle the COVID virus or other viruses again into a new product. So that's something which is not done. So you have a hygienization point, and all these parameters will define the number of plants. But it must be looked at what you said in an integrated waste management. It is not, we should never build a plant just to build a plant in order to be there. We need to do what we are striving to do: circularity of economy, resource efficiency, and avoiding to pollute our planet. That's what we should try to do.
Again, maybe in member states, especially where there are very low recycling rates and very high landfilling rates, the way to make a big shift is, of course, to have more recycling facilities and more waste-to-energy facilities. And if it's not taxonomy eligible, then not only the green finance, but any kind of bank or financial partner will avoid to lend money, because they are also green tagged in their reports. Companies are also green tagged reporting. They make non-financial reporting. And all in all, even if it's not only about the green activities, any legal activity which is not taxonomy eligible will be in trouble for its development. This is why we think that having strong criteria makes this development virtuous, and having no criteria makes this development not happening, which will be a problem.
Jonas, yeah,
for me, that sounds like an argument that everything in the economy should be in the taxonomy, even if it's not net zero compliance, everything that we want to be able to invest in. And there are some things that, of course, will have a shorter timeline. Some things will have a longer timeline. But I don't think we can make that argument, because then the taxonomy is at some point meaningless. Wouldn't you agree?
Establishes criteria. So quality criteria. So we are not saying all waste-to-energy plants needs to be eligible. R1, of course, and a certain, the criteria I mentioned, to make sure it is only residual waste, because those need outlets. And if they don't have outlets, by law, recycling facilities has to be closed. If you have residues, you don't put them in your yard. You have to make sure there is an outlet for them. We see some Belgian members of FEAD being obliged to look for outlets not in Belgium for landfilling, and that was the case of that, going to France for final residues because they had no outlets immediately available. And that can be the other way around. And we see that, so we have no big figures for that, but it's case by case, and it makes your life as a recycler impossible if you don't have outlets.
I suppose that is the question here. What happens if it's not in the taxonomy? What are going to be the real world impacts of losing out on this kind of investment and this kind of sustainable tag? Patrick, please.
So what is the impact? First of all, we're coming back to the first question. Is it needed for net zero carbon? And I support you on this. This should be our aim, driving our activities, because we want to go to net zero carbon. And do you need waste to energy in there, in an integrated waste treatment? We believe yes. If others believe no, they should tell us why they don't believe this and what they want to do with residual waste. So then the question about what will happen. We had Valerie explaining it quite clearly. Pension funds want to go sustainable. Companies need to show that they're sustainable. Municipalities want to go sustainable. So we're coming to a point where the only way to assess it if it's sustainable by looking either at some kind of green analyst to analyze and tag and rate the companies, or we're looking at tools, government tools like the taxonomy, to know if it's taxonomy compatible, then therefore if it's sustainable. And if you're not in it, you will not be treated as a sustainable technology. And again, you come back. Are we needed as residual waste treatment by 2050, 2030 maybe in Norway? Where is the role? And nobody until now showed me, beside by promises on PowerPoints, how we can get rid of what we have for the moment. And that's a real issue for me.
The waste management plans at national level are also one of the key points to be assessed, whether or not they exist. If they're not existing, that's not appropriate. If they're existing, then they will do the job. They will foresee what is needed.
But excuse me, these are waste management plans, as you say, and I think back to the 2030 point in Oslo. This, for me, again, is a climate question. Oslo is not aiming to be zero waste by 2030, but is aiming to be net zero emissions by 2030. And so, again, when we're having this discussion, I miss that engagements from the sector itself to say what is our plan for being net zero with our current installations. And I think you would also find that it's easier to make the case for relevance in the future and for relevance in taxonomy if that plan was existing. I don't see that plan anywhere at the moment.
What we do now in ESWET, we're providing the technologies, and in there we're looking at 2 points. And we started our work, the work groups we have. One is on hydrogen, as was just before, and the other on CCS. And we see both of them are needed because your trucks need to drive on something when you go. It could be electric, obviously, but if they're heavy trucks, I think you need some synthetic fuels or some hydrogen, a bit like this. So the plans for us is to allow the waste-to-energy plants, if they are needed, which we believe, because I don't believe in net zero waste. I believe in net zero carbon, but not in zero waste in 2050. I don't think we will be able to recycle everything and have no residual waste.
And can I come in with some questions from the audience? So Jana Helseth says, in Norway, even in areas with source sortings, still have a lot of recyclable waste ending up in mixed waste, including food waste, plastic waste, etc. And then that goes to incineration. What can we do to improve source sorting to achieve better sorting at home? Maybe Patrick, you want to take this one first?
This is the most important thing to do. Source separation, sorting at home, making sure that the one pollutant is not contaminating a recyclable product. Because at the end, if you have a chemical product which is ending up in the food waste, and you make a compost with the food waste, or with wood and you make a compost, then it ends up, the same pollutant ends up on the fields, and it's helping no one, so we don't want to have this. So if you separate this out and you make a separate collection where you have cleaner waste streams, obviously you have a better product to start with. So that's the most important part. But once it is mixed, then it depends on the environmental impact, if it's better to clean these plastics out of the other waste around it and use chemicals or whatever you need, solvents to do this, or if it's better to then incinerate. But then you should have an environmental footprint, looking what is better for the environment, you make a life cycle analysis, and you understand what you should do.
And Jonas, what's your view on that?
So, excuse me, I think just maybe back to a former point first, because I think, again, when you look at the Oslo project, and I think, our organization, we were 20 years ago saying there is no such thing as waste, it is a resource. And we still believe that has to be a direction, but we have to be able to have two thoughts in our head at the same time. So deal with climate emergency, and then at the same time try to reduce waste as much as we can every year, and make sure that we have realistic targets, so we have strict targets that force that development. And I think there might be a lot of nuances between the situation in each member state, and we have to recognize that. But at the end of the day, the targets for every sector of society is a net zero target, which means in the past, every sector might have hoped to be in a situation where they could get away with, carving out a few percents for themselves to be on the inside. But I think that is no longer a realistic hope for any sector, and that's why the pressure is on. And I would like to just say again, I think we need to see a plan, and we need to see a plan from the sector itself, and it's not on us to make that plan.
And a lot of this comes down to waste treatment. We have a question from Charlie Melio, talking about MRBT, so material recovery biological treatment, and we've heard a bit about that today. Valerie, maybe I'll come to you with this question. How efficient can sorting residual waste be when it's already been sorted at home in MRBT alternative? Isn't the improved sorting at source a better solution? So how do they compare against each other?
First problem is we haven't seen MRBT working at a large scale. So when we see it and if it works, we will consider it, but it's not industry proven. Then another remark I'd like to do is our colleagues from CWEP did a very good study Patrick invited you to look at, and there are estimates on the savings of CO2 up until 2030. Because when you use the energy content of the waste, you save on fossil fuel. I know that one day every energy production will be from renewables, but it's not yet. So each single ton you haven't emitted is always a gain. And then the second thing is that also in relation with this study, we should not look at every installation's emissions. We should look at the sector as a whole, waste management sector. We're going to issue together with other partners a study trying and show how much the waste management sector can avoid CO2 emissions, but not a sector and another sector, not collection apart from recycling, apart from waste to energy, apart from disposing of, all together. And then we sum it up, and then we see. Of course, the main positive contributions come from recycling, but it's a whole thing together because it's integrated.
Question to that, if that's okay. Yeah. So just because I think that's what you said about not looking at each plant, and I understand where you come from that, of course. But just on the point of the criteria that you listed earlier for new plants that you would like to see in taxonomy.
You're right. For the taxonomy, each plant will show if they respect the criteria. But generally speaking, if you consider the emissions of waste management as an integrated sector, then for the implementation of the taxonomy, it will be installation by installation. But don't forget that this is a needed installation.
And when it comes scheme play, waste to energy currently isn't covered by it. Do you think that if waste to energy was included in such a scheme, it would boost carbon capture and storage technology? Patrick, maybe to start with you.
Yes. So first about the plan to get CO2 neutral. a plant today emits 60% of CO2 from biogenic origin. So as was said before by Tom. So it leaves 40% of our emissions where we need to abate if you want to get out of this. We see that we recover metals, bottom ashes. We see that we divert this waste which will go to landfill. So today, if you calculate all this, either we are carbon neutral or near to carbon neutral, because the metals, you need to dig it out. If you count the metal, a ton of metal to be produced. So there are again numbers and studies which we did in this direction, and when you include all the added value we have, we are quite advanced compared to other technologies, other sectors. And very fast or you want to reply to this now, maybe?
Quick reply to the point about the metals, because I think that's important. I think that we can't really get into a situation where you can offset emissions in that way. It doesn't work. I mean, the metal digging sector has to account for their own emissions. So, you know, everyone, if we're talking about net zero, the target for society, you can have. For me, this is a bit like what we hear sometimes from the chemical industry, that we produce insulation, so we reduce emissions in houses.
Accepted your point. So we're not neutral, but we are already quite near, and we have to get there. The point is a valid point. To apply to the CCS part, to the EU ETS part. So if waste to energy should be in the ETS, then we should to make sure, first of all, that you're not creating a perverse incentive and pushing some waste out of this capture or the ETS stream, meaning you need and also landfills and other waste treatments to be included. It cannot be I take just one and I don't put the rest. So it must be, everything must be included. It's very important. The second point is it better for the environment or not? All the discussions we had until now did not have a proper impact assessment to know if it's better or not better. I think at the end, for sure, if we have CCS, we can live with both. We get an added credits because we get negative where we can sell these, and there are revenue streams with that. So it's not a clear cut we want to be out, we want to be in, but it must be done correctly. And basically this means that this CCS topic must be pushed, supported, implemented, because a plant can abate CO2. And we're coming back to this argument which is often used, the chicken and egg argument. Oh, there's no infrastructure to transfer the CO2, so why should we capture the CO2? No, we need to push both in parallel and build it up, and there will be need for public support, because I don't believe that any sector can pay himself or itself for the whole infrastructure needed to ship it somewhere to, I don't know, Norway, or to ship it to the Netherlands and to store it offshore. Or, I mean, we need to have a discussion on societal ground and for other industries and for other sectors. So it's not a topic we can save in this.
Perhaps you can come in on this role of
Additional
ETS.
remark on ETS. ETS is designed and was designed and still for big installations, big emitters, and which can afford and which can technically and which have the resource to measure, to make the measurements, to be embedded in national emission plans, and so it's quite complicated machinery. So waste to energy installations are not all that level, that size. Some installations are very big, and many other ones are small ones, like SRF boilers, which can be small-sized installations. And the ETS is obviously not practicable for them, for any reasons, the reasons I mentioned. So also, the whole waste management sector does not account for many emissions in comparison to other sectors. This is why, and waste to energy is 1.5% of the total EU economy. So, all in all, the European Commission decided to keep the whole waste management sector in the ESR, which has now to do lots of much bigger efforts, ambitious efforts. So don't doubt that the constraint on reducing emissions will be strong, but not based on an instrument like ETS. It will be based on other constraints.
So what's your view on this? The waste is still under the effort sharing regulation rather than the ETS. Is that a good choice of the European Commission?
It's a very good question, and it's one with a lot of aspects. So I'll try to make my response quick. But first of all, the ETS, it was indeed kept outside ETS, but there are some member states that actually chose to opt it in, if you can call it that. And so I don't have the list in front of me, but I know some member states actually included the waste incineration in ETS. Now, of course, as Patrick referred to earlier, the 40% or whichever percentage in each plant you have, which is biogenic, would be outside of that. So you still wouldn't have a clear mechanism to implement, say, 100% capture if you're going to do CCS on such a plant. And that's the general, of course, issue with the treatment of biomass in the EU, that everything is counted as neutral, whatever emission point source or wherever it comes from. But just on the point of the ETS, I don't really have a strong opinion. I know that what we've seen in many cases with ETS is that it's been used as an argument against doing anything. So, government will say, well, if we do reduce emissions on this plant, then it will be cheaper for whoever, a coal plant in Poland or someone in Spain to emit, because we act here. And so, in a way, you can say that it's been holding back action where it could have taken place, where it could have driven down costs. So I think we need to have a wider set of tools. The Innovation Fund, of course, is part of the answer to that. And we need to, I think, widen it. I work on industry. We've seen, of course, a great step from the Commission in terms of increasing the size of the Innovation Fund, but the allocation for industry hasn't risen a lot, and we need to see a lot more funding be made available to drive down technology costs. Now, at the same time, and that's back to your point about who pays, right? Who pays for emissions? So the principle that is at the basis of the ETS is the polluter pays, and I guess you can say waste incineration, but also many other sectors, there's a question of who is the polluter. So now we're getting into something which is quite controversial, I think. But the reality is that in the case of waste incinerations, it's often owned by the public. So it's the taxpayer that's going to have to pay in some way, or the people who will be, basically putting waste into incineration. And that brings us to the consumer. I think that a lot of sectors, we need to see a shift in approach to make sure that at the end of the day, you pay for the emission you cause. We know, for example, in the cement sector and the steel sector, the increase in the cost of steel or cement that is produced with zero emissions, which is possible to do today, but no one does it because there is no business case for it. It will increase by maybe 1 or 2 or 3%. That's max. The cost of the final product. But no one is talking about that. And so we need to see the whole picture of how we finance climate action turn around. I'm not saying that, just making people pay more for waste is an easy way to go, because there's a social element in that. And that's true for all of the products that we need to make net zero. There's a product design conversation to be had here in any case. But I think there has to be a way to turn this around and make it investable now, because we don't have any more time to lose.
Let's pick up on that question. Patrick, who is the polluter when it comes to waste to energy plants?
I mean, it's very clear. If you look at who generates the waste, it's not the plant. So there's the first pollution happening, if you like, and that's why it's collected, in order to not pollute. And there are different mechanisms where the people who generate waste pay for this. Municipals make people pay taxes where they use this to have afterwards the waste treatment, overall integrated waste treatment, recycling, composting, anaerobic digestion, whatever you do, and also waste to energy. So that's the clear point. So you're in a two-step approach here. And at the end, the polluter who pays the CO2, if you like, if you call this a CO2 pollution, then you would have the plant emitting the CO2. But it will only add up the cost on the gate fee, because the money must come from the one who makes the waste in the first place. There's no magic, no one else. If you look at a coal plant who shifted to biomass, that's possible. But in a waste energy plant, you cannot make a fuel switch. Or replacing dirty coal by cleaner gas, you cannot do it in a waste energy plant. So in waste energy, you're stuck with the main task you have to do to treat non-residual waste, to avoid pollution, to recycle materials and recover energy. And that's what you do.
And we're beginning to run out of time now, so I'll ask you to give maybe a 1 or 2 minutes of your key points and your key takeaways from today. Jonas, let's maybe start with you.
Right. So first of all, since this was a taxonomy discussion as a starting point, I would like to again say the taxonomy has to be kept as a gold standard. And it's critical. We know that the gas debate is coming up, the whole transition story, all of the pressure has been put on the Commission from even the member states that often have been, the good guys in the climate debate. There's a pressure to include all kinds of stuff in the taxonomy that isn't compliant with a net zero pathway, and we can't allow that to happen. So we have to find a different way to ensure that these things that may be necessary. And again, we have to look at the numbers. But for me, it is really about, in the context of waste incinerator, even the investments that need to be made into existing installations like CCS and other measures to deal with emissions are not currently eligible. That has to be changed, I think. But so the taxonomy as a gold standard. Secondly, and when it comes to the funding, I'm not saying that we should have necessarily every person should be paying for this, but I think we need to find a way to turn this into incentive government also to reduce waste, and that's maybe lacking at the moment. So whether it's the government that pays or every one of us, it has to be turned around so that the implementation of climate measures in the sector is incentivized and reduction of waste is incentivized at the same time. And last but not least, back to your question earlier, you said could this inclusion in ETS boost CCS? I think that's a wrong framing, because we don't want to boost CCS. No one should want to boost CCS. CCS is effectively in some form of waste management as well. We have a CO2 problem, and currently we're dumping billions of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. And that is, you could say CO2 is maybe not the definition of waste, but it's a definition of a massive problem that we have to manage. And so what we want to do is reduce waste and reduce the need for CCS, but at the same time recognize that we're out of time. Thank you.
And Valerie, your takeaway points from today?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that it's essential to address residual waste in the taxonomy, either to make it a gold standard with a focus on selective collection, separating waste and sorting out, which is very positive and which we have to improve, and which we have to justify that the waste-to-energy plant take waste only from those separately selected waste sources, or collected or sorted out. So to make sure it's only residual, but this would be a golden standard in the end. This would be a green practice. And call it green or not, if you don't have such a signal, then you will lack the capacities to properly treat those waste, which is crucial in the circular economy. So I'm sorry to repeat the reason why we say that there is an absolute need to address the residual waste issue in the taxonomy, to make it with green practices or to make it happen anyway.
Thank you. And Patrick, you opened our session. Perhaps it's best that you close it too. What is your takeaway from today?
Yes, over the whole day, it is quite a lot. We had different point of views, but we clearly shared some facts which showed that, in my opinion, residual waste will not go away. Should be minimized, can be minimized, but will not go away. And therefore, and closing with the taxonomy topic, I believe that it is absolutely necessary to include, and take your words, gold standard for waste to energy, but to have a clear assessment of the role of waste to energy in the taxonomy, in the environment, in the net zero, what is expected, what can be contributed, because not addressing it will not solve the issue of residual waste. So look at it in an integrated way, look at it in a circular way, look at this in the CO2 reduction way, look into residual waste management needs, and then come up with a support for CCS integration, clarification of the rules for taxonomy, and the definition of the role, how the residues which are recovered by waste to energy can be taken up in the economy.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. You can find more EURACTIV events on our website. But for now, thank you for joining us and hope you have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.